I think the 20th century will be remembered as a disaster in human history. I think in the year, in 2,200 years, people will say, how could those people live in those horrible cities of the year 2010? Today we talk of London 1800 as a horrible living environment, overcrowded, polluted. Yet London at that time was the most advanced and admired city in the world. So how can we do? Here we are in a show of creation. How can we create different cities, better cities, something different than we have? Is it possible or is it not? Towards the end of the 20th century, they began to make, people realized we had made huge mistakes, cities just for cars. So we began to close streets, a few streets for pedestrians only, for bicycles. Every European city or town has at least a few streets. Even Chinese cities, they have important pedestrians. This is in Santiago, these two blind women, how could they be so safe and enjoying life if they did not have this car-free street? And recently, there are so many interesting things. They are taking space out of cars. This is San Francisco, this is in New York. Very recently, the last 6 months, they have almost taken half the space out of Broadway, just for Broadway in Manhattan, just for pedestrians and bicycles. This is not just for a few days or a few hours. They are going to close Broadway altogether, just for pedestrians. Everywhere in the world, some of these things are happening to some degree. This is an interesting experiment in Bogota. This is a 25-kilometer pedestrian and bicycle street only, through the expansion area of the city. Of course, the city is already all around it, except it's very difficult to get into a helicopter once you're not a mayor any longer, to take another picture. But this is a very simple concept, but a completely different way of organizing life in a city. Imagine, this is very low-income neighborhoods, and it transforms completely. Look, this is the typical, I did something wrong. The typical illegal neighborhood in Bogota in the process of becoming legal. Before we made the space for cars, we first made the space for people and for bicycles. We show respect for human dignity. Every detail in a city should show that human beings are safe. So this is the thing, how it begins to get once the buildings arrive. This picture is interesting because you can see the park, a very nice school back there, pedestrians, even underground cables, a fence in the bicycle space, and the cars in the mud. In a city, of course, 99% of the people in those neighborhoods don't have cars. But this creates also equality, creates respect for people. The Japanese Cooperation Agency is a little dangerous. I found it in many places in the world because they go everywhere proposing elevated highways and also sometimes subways, not so much because they don't want the buses to take space away from cars, but they propose to us to invest like $15 billion in highways in Bogota. Elevated highways all over the place, so we decided no. Instead, we began to restrict car use. 40% of cars could not go out during peak hours. We began to get cars off the sidewalks. And for example, in this case, they proposed an 8-lane highway, and we made a 35-kilometer greenway, linking some of the poorest and some of the richest neighborhoods in the city. Again, thousands of bicyclists go to work every day, and we are creating a more fun city also. It goes out to the countryside. But such pedestrian and bicycle streets, promenades, is not just for the poor. Imagine, any of you, if within 2 or 3 or 4 blocks of your home, you would enter a pedestrian network of maybe 100 kilometers, where you could just go jogging or riding a bicycle or taking a baby carriage or just sitting there and watching people go by, it would radically improve your life. And if we plan this well, it doesn't cost anything. At least in the new Asian cities, it would be so easy to do. It's a completely different way of organizing cities, and it doesn't cost anything at all. This is in Münster in Germany. The main street around the town is a pedestrian street, and 50% of the people go to work by bicycle every day. Again, Munster in Germany. Now, sidewalks, very quickly. This shows inequality. This shows that in these societies in the developing world, there are two classes, the people with cars and those without cars. This is first-class citizens and then third-class citizens. I would say that quality sidewalks are the most important element of a democratic city's infrastructure. What really makes the difference between an advanced city and a backward city is not highways. You'll find highways in the poorest African cities where they don't even have running water in half the city. It's great sidewalks. That's what really makes a difference in a democratic city. Not even children are more important than cars. Chinese cities, for the most part, are a disaster in that sense. And many American suburbs, Canadians much less happily, don't have sidewalks because they thought this was elegant. It was rural. You look, so when children are playing and a car comes, parents jump to try to get the children out of the way. This is Colombia, a disaster. I mean, Bogota, still much of it like this. I was almost impeached for getting tens of thousands of cars out of the sidewalks and making sidewalks. My hair was black before this battle. And of course, people would tell me, Mayor, you are so stubborn because there is enough space in the sidewalk to park cars as well as for people to walk by. So we had to have this TV commercial saying, look, we tend to think that sidewalks are relatives of streets because they live next to each other. But in fact, sidewalks are not for getting from one place to another. They can be useful for that, but basically sidewalks are for looking at the city, for playing, for doing business, for kissing. Sidewalks really are much closer relatives of parks than of streets. And it would be just as absurd to say that there is enough space in a sidewalk to park cars as well as for people to walk by, as it would be to say that we can turn the main park or the main plaza in a city into an open-air parking lot so long as we leave enough space between cars for people to walk by. This is very difficult, and you may say, this is irrelevant for Canada? No, I think it's very relevant because we could get rid of cars of curbside parking and make sidewalks much bigger. Many streets in Toronto are very big and the sidewalks relatively small. I'm not saying you should do it or not. All I'm saying, this is a political decision, not a technical decision. How does the most valuable resource a society has is its road space. A city has, I mean. How do we distribute it between pedestrians, bicyclists, public transport, and cars? This is not a technical decision. This is the type of sidewalks we did. How big should sidewalks be? As big as you can make them. There is not a formula. This is not mathematical. There is nothing. Ideally, sidewalks, I think, should continue at grade. So to show very clearly that it's cars that are entering pedestrian space and not vice versa. Of course, not in the big intersections, but at least in all minor intersections. So that it's clear that it's pedestrian space. It's a city for people where cars are invited, but it's not a city for cars.